Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Billi.
I'm Zara.
Yesterday, you likely saw the news that the two astronauts, Sunny Williams and Butch Wilmore, arrived back on Earth after an unplanned 9 months at the International Space Station. The capsule carrying the astronauts splashed down yesterday morning our time, surrounded by dolphins on a beautiful sunny day. It was an extraordinary ending to a long saga that has captured the attention of the world. Today, we're going to take you back to why the astronauts were in space for so long in the first place, and what happens now that they are back on Earth.
Billi, we did a podcast on this very topic a few months back. I remember you were dying to tell the story of these two astronauts back then, and now they finally arrived back to Earth. That is cause for celebration, but I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. So I do just want to start, maybe for those who didn't listen to that last episode, with just some context setting as to why the hell we're talking about these astronauts for a second time.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. So this all has to do with the commercial space travel, so the privatization of the space industry. And it all starts because of Boeing, which you likely will be familiar with because they are the US plane manufacturer, and they were wanting to test their first crewed spacecraft.
I think a lot of people will also know Boeing because they've made headlines a lot recently.
Yes, that is not why people know them. They know them, traveling overseas or something like that. But we're talking about them today because in this scenario, they were wanting to test their first crewed spacecraft. So they're wanting to expand into the space travel industry. And so they had this deal with NASA. Now, the deal was that NASA would provide the astronauts and Boeing would provide the spacecraft. And the whole aim was to see if Boeing could provide a safe way to get to the International Space Station, which, if you're not familiar with the ISS, it is just a large spacecraft that orbits Earth, and it allows astronauts from all different countries to live there in space. Now, with this Boeing experiment, there were two astronauts on board, and they were called Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams. Now, they took off in early June. I should mention there was this whole saga leading up to it. There were so many delays even before this launch. It was really a decade process of getting to the point that they were able to lift off. But we're starting in early June last year when they did lift off and they arrived at the International Space Station safely a few days later. Now, the plan, as I'm sure many of us are now familiar with, was for them to only be there for about a week or about 8 days. And then they were going to return to Earth on the Boeing spacecraft that they had arrived in, which is called the Starliner. But, long story short, there were many issues with Starliner, and it wasn't safe for them to come home. And so their return to Earth kept getting delayed, and eventually it was decided in September last year that Starliner would return to Earth, but without Butch and Sunny. So Butch and Sunny would stay at the International Space Station.
And so it was about this time that this narrative really emerged, at least in the media, that these two astronauts were just stuck in space, I guess, indefinitely.
Yeah, that word stuck or stranded is another word that keeps being thrown around by the media. Although Butch and Sunny and also NASA, they have always rejected that wording that they are stuck or stranded. The other day I was listening to an interview that they did with the New York Times, the Daily podcast, and Michael Barbaro, the host, said, if you guys don't want us to describe you as stuck or stranded, how do we describe this situation where you have been in space and at every step it really has been delayed?
You're meant to be there for a week and you've been there for many, many months.
And their answer was, we're just working and having fun. And I thought that response really speaks to their spirit this entire time. Whilst down here on Earth, we have been saying, oh my goodness, we kind of all see it as like this horrific, prolonged work trip that we would all hate to be on. But their spirit and their attitude towards this the entire time has been so positive.
We did have a discussion in the office about who in our office would be best suited to being stuck in space. We quickly ruled ourselves out as viable options. Sam put his hand up as a viable option, forgetting that he has significant asthma and can't see out of one eye. So the prospects are dwindling, but it's clear that there is a temperament and certainly an optimism that is built into the people that go to space.
That is true, but I guess astronauts are just built
differently.
differently. I've watched so many press conferences and so many interviews that these two have done. And again, their attitude is just so positive. Here's Sunny talking earlier this month.
Oh, don't remind me this might be my last flight. That's a little sad. I'm trying not to think about it too much, because like I mentioned earlier, being in space is just pretty spectacular. And, having the opportunity to come up here, I know we're very, very lucky. And having the opportunity to come up here 3 times has just been amazing.
So while we're all talking about, oh my God, when are they coming home? She's saying, oh my God, this is going to be the last trip that I probably do in space. I'm just trying to savor every last moment.
Look, it is really a matter of perspective and certainly an interesting thing to witness from down here on Earth. I am really curious, though, what do we know, or what do we understand at least, about what the astronauts were doing up there, whether or not they were stuck, stranded, or anything else?
No, they were just having fun.
Just having fun.
Well, they literally just worked. They did what astronauts do at the International Space Station. So they did a lot of maintenance on the station. They also did nearly 1,000 hours of scientific research.
Sorry, I just have to interrupt you. I was just thinking about the fact that we have right to disconnect laws in Australia. And imagine that they were like, no, you contracted us for a week. You cannot contact us outside of this week. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, their entire life literally revolved around being in space. They also completed spacewalks. And whilst they were there, Sunny actually set the record for the most time spent on spacewalks cumulatively for a female. So she has now spent 62 hours and 6 minutes over her career doing spacewalks. Reminder, this is her 3rd time in space. So that's not just the time spent on spacewalks this trip. This is now her 3rd and, like I said, probably her last time in space.
I imagine that if you're spending that much time doing spacewalks, you'd see some pretty incredible things.
Yeah, even just from the International Space Station, you can literally see Earth. Quick side note, they have been able to see quite a few natural disasters, which I'm sure would have been at times quite devastating to watch on and probably feeling so helpless. Last July, they saw a hurricane hit Houston, where they're from, and the storm that they were watching actually took off the roof of Butch Wilmore's home.
Wow.
Yeah, so he heard that news from his family, who they have been able to communicate with while they have been in space. And they also saw the fires in LA unfold earlier this year. So they have been able to see a lot from space.
Really a bird's eye view of everything that's happening here. So, Billi, that brings us to now, to the present, where we have finally had these astronauts return home. What did that journey look like, and why now? How did it happen?
Hi, I'm Ola.
And I'm Elliot.
We're the 2-person team behind everything video and audio here at the Daily Aus.
If you want to help us grow so we can deliver more of the content that you love, be sure to hit subscribe.
Now let's get back to the video.
Well, it actually has a lot to do with Elon Musk. So, as I'm sure many of you know, Elon Musk, the billionaire, one of the richest men in the world, he is the owner of X, he's the co-founder of Tesla, and he also is the founder and CEO of SpaceX.
It's so interesting that we've obviously spoken about Elon Musk a lot on this podcast, but often for very different reasons. Like we've spoken about it in the context of X, now in the context of the US presidency, and now in a completely different context as the CEO of SpaceX.
A man with many fingers and many different pies. So SpaceX also has a deal with NASA, just like Boeing, as I was mentioning earlier, to send astronauts into space. And actually in 2020, SpaceX was the first private company to launch humans into space. So that again goes to the conversation about the commercial space travel industry. And so SpaceX sent 2 astronauts into space. They sent them to the International Space Station and they returned them home safely. And like I said, that's exactly what Boeing was trying to do but wasn't quite able to do. But yeah, that was in 2020. One way to escape a pandemic, by going to space.
Yeah, true. So then how does SpaceX enter this story? What's Elon Musk's role in this?
So because Boeing couldn't provide a safe spacecraft to return the astronauts to Earth, SpaceX then stepped in and sent their spacecraft to save the astronauts. Now, it's because of this that this story actually became somewhat of a political storm earlier this year. President Trump and Elon Musk basically accused the former administration under Joe Biden of abandoning Butch and Sunny, and they phrased the launching of SpaceX to go get them as basically this big rescue mission ordered by the White House. Musk also claimed that the Biden administration rejected his offer to bring them home sooner. NASA has said that they don't know exactly about that offer, and they've really tried to steer the conversation away from politics. And I think every time I hear them talking, I hear NASA and also Butch and Sunny talking about what they're doing at the International Space Station. They really talk about doing this for the betterment of society and for humankind, and they really try to steer the conversation away from politics. And that kind of political conversation even continued yesterday when they did splash down yesterday. Musk thanked Trump for prioritizing the mission.
Billi, there's one thing that I have not stopped thinking about since these astronauts hit planet Earth, and that is what that long in space would do to your body and to your mind. It's one thing to prepare for a mission that is going to take a certain period of time. It's another to be there, I guess, by accident for that long. Have we heard from them? Like, what has this done to them?
Yeah, well, part of the research that they were doing at the International Space Station was looking at what that kind of time in space does do to the human body.
Interesting.
The first thing to take note of is the fact that there is obviously no gravity in space. So whenever you see the press conferences of them, you'll see them floating around. You'll see the hair floating.
Yeah. I don't understand why they don't put their hair in ponytails.
I looked this up and the answer was basically there's no need for ponytails, because if the idea of that is to put your hair back, the lack of gravity basically does that for you. So there's literally just no need for it.
It feels like it would be annoying, but that's just my absolutely no empirical basis point.
Yeah, I was fascinated by that as well, because when the other astronauts arrived earlier this week, another female also had her hair just everywhere, and that's why I looked it up, because I was like, surely it's annoying. But apparently the answer is no. Just on the absence of gravity, it really does have a huge impact on the human body, particularly on the density of bones. So astronauts have to be super fit, particularly when they are there in space. They actually need to exercise for 2 hours every single day.
Every day?
Every single day.
2 hours?
Yeah, to counteract the fact that they are losing bone density whilst there. And so they have things like they have a
never making excuses ever again.
They have a treadmill there, and they kind of have this harness to make sure that they're not floating away. They also have special space weights so that again they can make sure that their bone density is still keeping up. And so that's the kind of things that they have to do to prevent there being a huge impact once they arrive back on Earth. And now that they are home, NASA and their medical team will be doing a lot of research on testing to better understand the impact of spaceflight on the human body. But as we speak at the moment, they very likely have doctors around them making sure that they are all good to go and that they can readapt to life on Earth, because even something like walking, that's something that they have not done for 9 months. So they really need to readapt to Earth again.
Can you just imagine going to bed for the first time that night?
Yeah.
Like, what would you be thinking about? I just want to talk to them. Maybe we'll get them on the podcast.
Yeah, look, I thought about this. I was like, we should reach out to NASA. And then I remembered the time that I did an interview with NASA and I forgot to hit record. And it was one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. And I shall never be reaching out to them again.
Okay, well, NASA, if you're listening, we would love to speak to your incredible astronauts. So if you can make that happen, we'd be stoked. All right, well, Billi, thank you so much for explaining this story. And thank you for joining us for another episode of The Daily Aus. We'll be back as usual with the afternoon headlines later today. But until then, have a great day.